Alright, hello again to everybody out there, and welcome back to my channel where I talk about living in Japan, traveling, finance, and things like that. So, in this episode, I just wanted to talk about some things I feel that are really helpful that I've learned from Betterhelp that I've been doing for about 2 months now. I made a video where I kind of poked a little bit at Betterhelp and gave kind of a critical review, but I have gotten a lot of really useful kind of emotional and mental tools from those guys. So I wanted to share those three things. And I'll probably be adding more as I go along with BetterHelp because they're really, really helpful, actually. And I think therapy is a right for everyone and should be available. So I wanted to kind of share some of the things that I've learned from my therapist, who's phenomenal. She's really good, really good. So the first thing that she kind of taught me is about sources of love and kind of like toxic versus kind of healthy or beneficial sources of love. And she was saying that as humans, as people, we need love, you need to get it, and you need to give it. And my kind of theory on that is like if you get too much love like stored up in you, or if you don't give it enough, that you kind of get like it's not good for you. Like you want love to be flowing, you don't want it to just like stagnate. So she was saying we do whatever it takes to actually get love and get community because we're social creatures. So if we do, she was saying, feel a lack of love when we grow up, we look to get it in any sort of way and we kind of test that. And sometimes those ways can be destructive. We've developed behavior patterns to get that love that you need in your life. You might develop those as like a young kid, she was saying. An example of that could be or I guess when you're older, like staying in an abusive relationship, even though it's not good for you, you're staying in it just because you're trying to latch on and hang on to your perception of what's love, even though it might not be. So, yeah, there are a lot of other things that you could probably try to substitute in your life to either give you happiness or the perception of happiness, whether it be like drugs or gambling. And they're great things too. They're like things that you can bring into your life to get love as well, like a pet you can adopt, you can have kids, you can turn to religion, meditation, self-reflection, just self-love. So she's saying that's very important to kind of be mindful of that and think of just love in your life and what roles it plays. And just going off what she was saying, I thought a good reflection point would be to just kind of ask yourself where you currently are getting your love and affection from. Is it external? Is it internal? Do you want it to be external? Do you want it to be internal? How do you feel about it? Do you feel like you're at peace? Do you feel like you're lacking? Where do you want it to be coming from? Generally, it seems like it's a lot more liberating to have that love come from inside. Of course, it's not easy. It's not as easy, right? It's easier to get those external loves, whether it be, just from the internet, you get that dopamine going on. So I think it's a really powerful reflection point to kind of think where you get your love from. Do you want to continue this like method? How do you feel it's serving you? Is it serving you in the way you want? Is it bringing you the kind of energy you want? Is it causing you in your life to have other things gravitate towards you in the way that you want, whether it's your family or your job, developing in that way? So it's a nice little mind cookie to gnaw on. It's a good idea. Her second main point to me, which I've never even thought of, I think it's really, really powerful, is so reframing and remolding your self-identity. So that kind of plays into the first thing I was talking about. She was saying the first thing being kind of how you developed. Of course, a part of how you developed is, what kind of love you got, how you loved yourself, and how you kind of grew in that soil, so to speak. So she's saying your thoughts create your emotions. And that was one of the main points that she was telling me. Your thoughts create your emotions. Okay, so if you're happy or if you're sad, there's dialogue or like a script or program or whatever running in your head that's making you feel that certain way. So for example, I catch myself sometimes saying things to myself kind of subconsciously, and sometimes they'll pop up and I realize, oh, maybe that's not such a good idea, or I'm really being hard on myself. So she was saying, if, you're thinking certain ways that you don't want to right now. For me, for example, anxiety is my challenge. That's really hard for me. So if you want to change how you think, you first need to start with self-identity. That's like the core you, your most basic thought process, your soul, you boiled down. That's like your basic script. So she's saying your self-identity plays into your thoughts. Over your life, you've kind of carved out these thoughts and thought patterns that your brain kind of goes to, your little habits. So she's saying self-identity leads to thoughts, and then those kind of like form and crystallize into your being. Being, meaning, like emotion, language, physiology, reaction to things. So you can change that. You can change it. And I was even trying to talk to her and be like, yeah, nah, I don't think you can. But she's really saying, like, you can change this. You can mold yourself. But it's more like a sculpture instead of, like, something rather quick. Like, it takes time. And you have to, like, poke it a little bit and kind of slowly mold yourself into the way you want to be. Because it's, depending on how old you are, it's been, 20, 30, 40 years of whatever you've previously been doing to bring you to where you are. So it's going to take a lot of work to change, but you can do it. You can absolutely do it. So, one phrase that she said to me that really poked out was practice being the being that you want to be. So imagine it. What specific actions would you need to take to do that? What can you do? So, for example, imagine being face-to-face with a slightly different version of you, maybe talking to that person, and like try to imagine the trait that you want to be, whether it's like anxious or confident or strong or powerful, and picture that in you and kind of get to know that person, talk to that person, imagine that person right in front of you. What are they like? Okay, and then just imagine that person kind of like melding into you. And you need to like believe it. You need to really believe that you can be this person and try to plant those seeds into your own mind, essentially, that this is you and you're going to develop, that belief in yourself that you can do it. For example, confidence. It takes time. Maybe you want to be able to be better at speaking in front of people. So just slowly, if you kind of encourage yourself all the time, eventually you will believe it, even if you don't now. Sooner or later, those seeds are going to kind of grow in your head and you're going to really have faith in yourself that you really can do it. So the last thing, going off of this self-identity, so before she was saying again, to change your self-identity, you need to kind of run these dialogues to yourself, so to speak. You need to get into your brain and literally like hack yourself, right? So your identity is kind of how you think and the thoughts you've already carved out. And that plays into the situation you're in now. Another thing she was teaching me is self-love. So again, a big thing she taught me is that feelings are reactions to your thoughts. I thought feelings are just like the base level thing, feelings and that's it. But deeper down are your thoughts, which come from your identity. Okay, so there's this like layer weird brain chaos cake thing going on. So if you want to try to change your self-identity, you need to start trying to give yourself, you can work backwards almost from the being, which is just you existing, and try to analyze the feelings that you have and then go back to the thoughts. These you can change. So for example, trying to identify negative thoughts and then feed positive thoughts back to yourself. You can try to change your self-identity using that method of kind of giving yourself positive thoughts and taking out the negative with self-love, which is also something that is very hard. Especially for me, I realize a lot of my inner dialogue is very, very negative, and I wouldn't say toxic, but it's just incredibly self-critical. So, yeah, feelings are reactions to your thoughts that are in your head. So if your goal is to be nice to yourself or have self-love, you need to kind of remold those thoughts in your head. So again, a question you can ask yourself is, what do you need to experience self-love? That's what my therapist said. Write down exactly what you would need to do to experience self-love. Is it literally hugging yourself, waking up and drinking water, doing yoga? Is it not gaslighting yourself? For me, that's what it is actually believing what I think and what I say. So what do you need to think in order to experience self-love? Is it self-trust? Is it confidence? Is it setting boundaries? So it's a muscle. You don't just like flip a switch and then you're like, oh, cool, I'm good at boundaries now. You need to constantly work at it. So external factors of self-love that you might need help with. If there's things that are kind of challenging you and pushing your boundaries, she said you can shift your focus. So if there's maybe, for example, a boss or a person who's giving you trouble, try to shift your focus from just being stressed out to actually on what's happening and what you can do. So try to differentiate what you can do from what you can't. That really helps. And if it's internal, so if the self-love issue is coming from internal, she said it's good to write down your bad thoughts to externalize them and then reframe that. So take the bad thought and then acknowledge it and then reframe it and then put it back in. So bad thought, acknowledge it, reframe it, put it back in your head. My little lazy, crappy diagram thing. So for anxiety, that's my big one. So for example, for that, some coping mechanisms are, if you're anxious, you can look around the room, focus on your feet, and then kind of work up your body just to bring you back into a mindful kind of state. So the good process is to first train yourself to consciously realize you're stressed, acknowledge it, and then kind of pull yourself out of it by being mindful, and then reframe it. So there's like those 4 things. So you're stressed, so acknowledge it, and then kind of try to get like a better thought and then reframe it. Yeah. So being aware and mindful again is the most important. So the core of this really is mindfulness, like she said. Try to mold the situation and look at your anxious thoughts, acknowledge it, and then put in a positive thought. So in a sense, it's kind of like aligning your body with your mind. A lot of the times if I get a little anxious, I realize it's because my mind is going like, there's this one concerning thought, and then that kind of branches out into like a whole bunch of other things, and then you get kind of like all wound up and like tied up in your brain. So I kind of picture taking away the power from the stress by just either closing your eyes and then just like realigning your mind with your body, so you're not just letting your mind kind of like go off into anxiety land. So that helps me. Those are some of her coping mechanisms. Again, either closing your eyes, meditate, and just breathe like that, or again to look around the room. So she said, really another powerful quote, when you recognize your emotion, you have the power to shift it. So if you can kind of catch yourself with an emotion that you don't like, then you can try to insert that positive thought and reframe that. And eventually you'll get in the habit of thinking the positive thought instead of the negative thought. And so another quick mechanism she told me about is to work backwards from the emotion, which is pretty logical, but it makes sense. It puts you into a more mindful state again. So for example, anxiety, acknowledge it, ask where it's from, and then try to see if that makes sense and if you can do something about it. So for example, COVID is an easy example of a stressful trigger, or not trigger necessarily, but just something that's very stress-inducing. So the maybe general outline of that would be to feel stress. You can then acknowledge that you're stressed. and then ask yourself why you're stressed. You realize it's COVID, and then try to differentiate what you can and can't do and kind of process your feelings on that. So an example could be, I'm okay now because I'm healthy enough to worry about COVID. It's kind of my like weird meta thought. Another one, COVID will pass in time. Or another one, I'm eating and sleeping well and wearing masks, so I'm doing a good job at doing the best I can. So not just I'm doing the best I can, but really trying to acknowledge what you've done so far. That's another really important thing that I'll probably touch on later, is really celebrating yourself, celebrating your efforts, and celebrating what you've done so far, like I've said. So I'll talk more about these in other videos. I think these are very important topics. Again, so 3 things I learned from her. So the first one is sources of love and good versus toxic sources of love. Basically, we do whatever we can do to get love, whether it's from good sources or bad sources. So this is a good self-reflection point to analyze your sources and see if they're serving you well. And the next one, reframing and remolding your self-identity. So again, that's realizing that our thoughts cause our emotions, and really our thoughts come from our self-identity. So if you layer it, it's self-identity, core of you, which causes your thoughts, which creates your emotions. So if you want to try to change those thoughts and reframe those thoughts into positive things in order to try to put your emotions where you want them to be. So again, practice being the being that you want to be. What kind of speech is that like? What kind of body language is that like? What kind of thoughts is that like? And literally just be how you want to be. Even if it feels fake, eventually you'll grow into it. And last one, the way to kind of change your self-identity. One way is self-love, and by self-love you can kind of insert some of those positive and warm and like radiating thoughts into yourself to try to get to the core of the being that you want to be. All right, so sorry this is a little long, but yeah, I hope this can help people. Therapy is quite expensive, and I feel like everyone should have access to it. I feel like it's a human right, so I hope some of the things that I've learned from therapy can help you. So what are you working on right now? Do you have any thoughts or any goals or any mental health goals for this year? If you do, let me know in the comments. And until next time, we'll see you around.